Hi, amazing and awesome. Column 151, Intro to Mass Media students. Today we're going to talk about net neutrality, and we'll talk about some politics around net neutrality, hopefully what it means to us as consumers, internet access, and so forth and so on. And we'll go from there. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. Net neutrality, Obama, Trump, internet service providers, and us regular folks. Here's the definition. The idea, principle, or requirement that internet service providers should or must treat all internet data as the same, regardless of its kind, source, or destination. A philosophical contest that's being fought under the banner of net neutrality, a slogan that inspires rhetorical devotion but eludes precise definition. Broadly, it means everything on the internet should be equally accessible, that the internet should be a place where great ideas compete on equal terms with big money. That from Sarah Rabel, and the definition from Merriam-Webster. First up is this video from the Wall Street Journal from 2015. Remember, Obama was still in office. This is the year before, the big election year. So let's watch.
Net neutrality. It's a seemingly complicated hot-button term, but it's actually based on a pretty simple philosophy, that everything on the internet should be treated equally. Broadband providers shouldn't be able to decide which websites to block or to slow down. Let's look at an example. I pay for cable and internet through a service provider, so when I go online, I expect to be able to watch all the GOAT videos my heart desires. And when I go on Netflix, I expect to be able to binge House of Cards without any interruptions in service. But without net neutrality, there's nothing stopping my service provider from simply blocking websites or slowing down the streaming speeds of websites, like Netflix. And it's already happened. In 2007, Verizon blocked text messages from a pro-choice abortion rights group. Verizon said they had the right to prevent consumers' access to any groups the company might deem controversial or unsavory, though they quickly backtracked. And just last year, Comcast slowed Netflix's streaming speeds until Netflix paid for smoother streaming. Netflix accounts for more than 30% of internet streaming, and Comcast believed that they should be accountable for some of the infrastructure upgrade costs. In February, when Netflix paid up, speeds went back up, as you can see here in the red line. Here's an analogy. Let's say FedEx wants Amazon to give them money because Amazon packages take up a large portion of their shipments, and FedEx thinks that they should chip in for their truck repairs. To pressure Amazon, FedEx slows down their delivery time, but the consumer is the one who paid for the 2-day shipping in the first place, and the consumer is the one hurt by having her packages delayed. The FCC wants to establish clear rules to make sure that broadband providers can't do this. They plan to define the internet providers as common carriers under Title II of the Communications Act. Companies regulated under Title II can't discriminate what services they're providing to the consumer. It's why FedEx can't discriminate against Amazon deliveries. Democrats and President Obama strongly support these regulations. Many Republicans in the broadband industry see it as more unnecessary government oversight. They worry the regulations will prevent innovation and growth. The thinking goes, if AT&T and Comcast are required to let anyone use their lines for free, why would they spend billions of dollars building them in the first place? They also see the free market as a solution. If you don't like Comcast slowing your Netflix, switch to Verizon. The sticking point there is the majority of American consumers currently only have one provider of high-speed internet service to choose from. The debate will likely continue after the FCC rules on this February 26th.
That was from the Wall Street Journal. Now here's this from Fox News, fairly early in the Trump administration, November of his first year. Let's see what the Trump administration was thinking at the time.
The Trump administration set to repeal another one of President Obama's major regulations. The so-called net neutrality rules placed internet service providers under some of the strictest regulatory oversight in America. So what does this mean for you? Here to explain, the man behind the plan, FCC Chairman Ajit Pai. Mr. Pai, good morning to you.
Good morning.
I've been reading online. You're out to break the internet. What are you doing?
All we are simply doing is putting engineers and entrepreneurs instead of bureaucrats and lawyers back in charge of the internet. So these rules were imposed 2 years ago, and they're inspired by 1930s Great Depression era regulations. And what we want to do is return to the free market consensus that started in the Clinton administration and that served the internet economy in America very well for many years.
Okay, what I have read online is some of your critics are saying, look, if they do that and let the free enterprise figure things out, they're going to wind up charging people more money for the service right now that is, for the most part, equal to everybody.
Number one, that is false. That's not the internet economy we had from 1996 until 2015 when these rules were imposed. There was nothing broken about the internet before 2015. And going forward, if a company acts in an anti-competitive way, the Federal Trade Commission is expressly empowered to protect competition and consumers. So I think that's a false fear.
But you know the possibility that when the free market system comes into play, somebody's going to come up with a great idea where if you pay extra, you get really fast internet. And some people who don't have it are going to go, hey, why do they get that and I don't?
Well, in some cases, you can imagine that kind of arrangement being pro-competitive, being good for startups and consumers. And in other cases, it might not be so worthwhile. And that's exactly why the Federal Trade Commission is the better agency to investigate it. They have a long tradition of investigating anti-competitive conduct, and I think they'll be very well positioned to take action if necessary.
Ajit, this is a hot topic online for obvious reasons. What do your critics get wrong about this?
Well, number one, they completely ignore the fact that this is of history, that we had a free and open internet before these regulations started, that there was a bipartisan consensus that started with President Clinton and extended through 2 successive administrations. And number two, they greatly overstate the fears about what the internet will look like going forward. So I think that they also ignore that we need much more investment in networks and infrastructure to get these businesses to take the risks to build these networks, especially in rural and low-income America. You need to have light-touch, market-based regulation, not micromanagement from Washington, D.C.
I was reading one item online that said before the Obama administration imposed all these rules a couple of years ago, the people behind the internet, the private industry, had invested something like $1.5 trillion. But then with all the regulations, it's like, hey, we're backing off. We don't know what's coming.
That's exactly right. And it's no surprise that some of these network operators are starting to look to invest in other industries, content, and even investing abroad. To the extent that the rules here in the United States make it more difficult to build a business case for investing in networks, the less likely we'll see investment in those networks. And that leaves folks who are on the wrong side of the digital divide even worse off.
Okay. And ultimately, this is going to come up for a vote when?
December 14th, and unlike the last administration, I'm publicly releasing the details of my plan over 3 weeks in advance so everyone can see it.
I bet online at fcc.gov?
That's right.
All right. I had that feeling. All right. Ajit Pai joining us the day before Thanksgiving. Thank you, sir, for joining us live.
My pleasure, and happy Thanksgiving.
You as well.
That was Ajit Pai. He was on the FCC under the Obama administration. President Trump appointed him to be the chair of the Federal Communications Commission. And the basic point there is he was thinking that the Federal Trade Commission would be able to keep major corporations like Comcast and Verizon in check instead of federal regulation against internet service providers. Now, a couple weeks later, here's what happened. Again from Fox News. Let's watch.
There could be major changes coming to your internet service, or not. It depends on what you read. No one really is sure what will happen now that the government has changed the rules governing the World Wide Web. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen is here to sort things out for us tonight.
The chair votes aye. The item is adopted.
Along party lines, 3-2, the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, voted to overturn the Obama-era regulations supporters call net neutrality rules. Now, broadband providers like Verizon, Comcast, and AT&T can slow down the interface for apps by rival firms, block them altogether, or charge them for faster online performance. FCC Chairman Ajit Pai, an Obama appointee elevated to the chairmanship by President Trump, argued the move restores the internet to the the rules under which it flourished prior to 2015 and will spur infrastructure investment by smaller firms across the country.
Companies in Oklahoma, in Ohio, in Minnesota, in Montana, and other places, these are the companies that have told us on the record that these rules stand in the way of them building out their networks.
Comcast, Verizon, AT&T, the internet belongs to me.
Ahead of the FCC action, protesters descended on 700 Verizon stores. Some large tech firms like Twitter, Facebook, and Alphabet, and many smaller ones like Reddit, Mozilla, and Kickstarter oppose the move, arguing a broadband oligarchy will effectively censor online content and stifle startup ingenuity.
I dissent from the corrupt process that has brought us to this point, and I dissent from the contempt this agency has shown our citizens in pursuing this path today.
The FCC also voted to transfer oversight of Internet service providers to the Federal Trade Commission. One architect of the early Internet era voiced concern about the new rules of the superhighway.
We need to make sure the Internet remains open for innovation, and we err on the side of making sure things are tilted in favor of those disruptors, those entrepreneurs that are really trying to launch new things, not the existing incumbents trying to kind of protect their lead.
New York's Democratic Attorney General has announced a multi-state lawsuit to roll back the rollback. Democratic Senator Ed Markey of Massachusetts is introducing legislation toward that end, and liberal groups say this will be an issue in 2018. Brett?
We'll see. James, thank you.
So the vote happened, and the net neutrality regulations that the Obama administration put in place were repealed under the Trump administration. Here's a take from the Washington Post about 6 months after that vote by the FCC.
So the FCC voted to repeal the government's net neutrality rules in a move that would allow internet providers to speed up some websites and slow down others. And it's a big victory for Republicans who have promised to roll back much of the regulations that were passed during the Obama administration. As a reminder, net neutrality is an idea that all internet traffic should be treated equally by your internet providers. The FCC's rule change would make it so that internet providers would be able to treat certain websites differently based on the type of content that they offer. Under the old rules, companies like Verizon were not allowed to favor sites they owned, like AOL or Yahoo, by blocking or slowing down sites that they didn't own, such as Google or Netflix. All of that changes under this new set of rules, and Verizon would be able to engage in that behavior just so long as it tells the public that it's doing so. The entire net neutrality issue has been pretty polarizing, with Democrats on one side saying these are vital consumer protections and a bulwark against internet provider misbehavior, with Republicans saying these rules are way too strict and impose unreasonable costs on businesses. Republicans also argue that this is an example of government overreach and that the FCC actually didn't have the power to implement these rules in the first place. Internet service providers say they largely don't have any interest in discriminating against certain websites. They simply want to find new and innovative business models that they can use to compete against the likes of Facebook and Google, two of the biggest advertising behemoths on the planet. It's hard to predict exactly what this decision will mean for the average computer user just because it involves so many variables. So many internet providers are trying to find new ways of finding money from customers, from websites, that it's really hard to tell what types of business models we might see in the future as a result of this rule change. A lot of policy experts think that the next step is for this FCC decision to be taken to court. Industry groups that represent the tech companies and Democrats on Capitol Hill have all promised to fight this, both in Congress and potentially in the courts. This issue is not going away anytime soon.
That was from the Washington Post, June 11th of 2018, following the vote of the previous December. The latest, at least as I have so far, and I've tried to do some recent research to see what's up. But anyway, California passed a net neutrality law in October of 2018. The Department of Justice is already suing. So this is an article in the CNN Business News that brought me to that, to that conclusion and understanding. So I don't really know where that stands. I think it's all still pending right now, but this concept of net neutrality is probably really far from over. There's a sense that we want to empower big internet service providers like Verizon and Comcast to have some autonomy, do what they want to do, so that they can continue to build out the infrastructure and make the 4G and the 5G and all these things that we just love in terms of our connectivity and speed work across the country, kind of everywhere we go. There's another sense that we don't want to be crimped. We don't want Verizon or Comcast to make a choice for us and hold up Amazon Prime or slow down Netflix or make it more difficult for new small startups to live on the web and do things in favor of their own products and services, let's say Comcast or Verizon. So it's a mixed bag. I think it's less a Republican and Democrat issue than our politicians in Washington are making it. I think it's a kind of a human issue and an accessibility issue. We'll see how it goes. Here's another article. Democrats' net neutrality bill would restore Obama-era FCC rules. The congressional Democrats introduced the Save the Internet Act of 2019, legislation that would restore the U.S. Federal Communication Commission, FCC, rules about net neutrality that were enacted during the Obama administration. The 3-page bill does not so much introduce a new law as wipe out an existing order that I showed you the video on, by the way, from the end of 2017, issued by FCC Chief Ajit Pai back in December, which effectively killed net neutrality. This is the link to the Fortune magazine article. If you'd like to read it, you have to get it from the PowerPoint. But yeah, and then I think essentially at this point in the game, the impeachment situation rose to the forefront, and all of this has been essentially backburnered since then. So net neutrality is important, no matter what you think about which side, more regulation, less regulation. It's an important issue when you think, especially you think about COVID-19 and our accessibility, our ability to talk with each other, to communicate with each other, to use YouTube like I'm using now, to use Zoom like I use to record this narration, to use my phone to stay in touch with my family. You can all relate to the sort of things I'm talking about. So that's the unit on net neutrality. Fairly simple. I think politicians are making it more political than it probably really is. I think there's a pragmatic solution to this, and it's people coming together and finding the compromise. But I don't know. I'm all about compromise, so that's where I tend to lean. Thanks for watching, and we'll be in touch. Bye.